Okay, looks like we're live. Hey, Thrivers, how's it going? Excited to be here with Mark Johnston today to answer some of your specific specific questions about communication. See, here I am already starting off with a really great communication, getting all my words wrong. So, Mark, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to having a good discussion with you.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so we really got some great questions. We're just going to dive right in. This is more of like a Q&A format. So if you're watching us live, go ahead and you can drop any of your questions, comments, any of your specific questions into the chat below, and we'll see how many of them we can get to today. So our first one is from Rusty. He asked us to give examples of ways we can communicate effectively and respectfully when we're not on the same page. Also, examples of how you de-escalate tense situations. Agreeing on items that are important for the development of children or determining financial priorities. This is a really big one, huh, Mark? This is a really common question, right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this is absolutely something that comes up a lot with our clients is, okay, how do we actually turn some of these tense situations around, and how do we, people will give me examples all the time of this unsolvable problem where their husband or wife looks one way and they're looking at a different way, and they seem to say, okay, because we can't agree on this, there's nothing that can be done, and that's just not the case. But first off, I want to address the issue that Rusty brought up with, okay, bringing down tense situations, because absolutely, if there's tension, nothing's going to really be effective with tense feelings, with upset feelings. Typically when that's going on, the person who's feeling that tension, that upset feelings, the anger or whatever, they're looking at the situation through a lens. And so anything that the other person is saying is going to be seen through that lens. It's going to be twisted just a little bit. And so you're going to have all these problems with communicating and getting across what it is that you actually want. Now, when Rusty is asking about specifically tense situations, it makes me wonder if he's asking about tension, or about whether someone's upset. Because for me, tension would be, okay, there's nothing being said, but there's kind of this awkward silence. It's something that you feel more than something that's said or heard, and that's something completely different than when it's moved on to actual act of anger and you do different things. So I'll address both of those just briefly. When there's that tension, that unspoken uneasiness between you and a partner, the best thing that you can do is just to bring it out in the open in as kind and understanding a way as possible. So if you feel like your partner is being very quiet, you can feel that they're uncomfortable, you can feel that they might be upset about something, I frequently tell my clients, whenever you see a barrier, a wall that's keeping you from something, from really connecting with your spouse, address that barrier there. In this case, just calling attention, just saying, honey, you know what, you seem really upset. You seem really uncomfortable. You seem really this or that. What's going on? And just by calling attention, usually that can at least get the ball rolling. It's very possible that they come out and they explode and they let out all these emotions all at once, but that's something that you can handle with. That's something that you can address at that point. But if you just leave it sitting there, what ends up happening is, if it doesn't get addressed, you and your spouse, you walk away from that situation with a negative impression of what just went on, and it ends up disconnecting the two of you. And really, you don't want that. You want that connection. So bring it out in the open and address what's going on. If it's moved on to active anger, people are starting to attack each other, maybe someone's raising their voice, simply offering some understanding and empathy in that situation generally brings things down pretty quick. And if you think about it, someone who's sad, someone who's upset, someone who's angry, they all have this thing in common, that they're looking for some understanding and they're looking for their problem to be addressed and solved for the most part. There's times where we just want to vent, but at least at the very bare minimum, that understanding. And so, if they're saying, you always do this to me, you always do that, this is not fair, I'm so upset about this, If you attack back, it's going to blow up in your face. But if you just sit there for a moment and try to get in their shoes and understand them, it brings things down very quickly, and you can then actually have a much more civil conversation. Now, as far as the disagreements themselves, that's, like I said, people seem to think, okay, if we disagree on this thing and I'm really holding fast to this one way of doing things, then there's nothing that we can do. That's just not the case. Very frequently, you and your spouse have a lot in common with some sort of, whatever the decision is. Rusty gives examples like development of children or determining financial priorities. Let's take children, for example. There's lots of things that you and your husband or wife probably agree with. You probably want what's best for the kids. You probably want them to be happy, for them to feel loved, for them to feel whatever. You want good things for your kids. If you focus in on that, what you agree with, then all the rest tends to go smoother. So let's say that for some reason, your wife wants the kids to go to public school and you want them to send them to private, and there's a financial disagreement, and here you are, and you're on divergent paths. If you can focus in on what is really, what you agree with, that you want what's best for the kids, that you want to be there and support them, and how do you best do that, it really makes things smoother. Taken the other way, if you're talking about, okay, private school and public school, you're coming at it from two opposite ends. You're going to butt heads. You're going to be on opposite teams. It's not going to go over well. But when you start with agreement and move towards cooperation, you're then working on a problem together instead of being on opposite teams. You're working on the same team. And I think, and I think that addresses Rusty's issues.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So yesterday when I did my live stream, I was a little bit vulnerable about that cycle of tension that Ben and I were in, midway point in our relationship. We've been married almost 12 years, and how that tension would just escalate until it got so bad that we would just explode out of anger and then be left so broken that we had nothing to do but to start to rebuild from there, and how dysfunctional that really was. And so I really appreciate what you mentioned as far as addressing that tension immediately, calling attention to it and just showing some understanding immediately. When you feel like someone has empathy or understanding toward you, if you can give that to your spouse, if your spouse can give that to you, that just immediately defuses the whole situation. So if you're feeling a lot of tension about a topic like child rearing, financial priorities, you might be seeing it on those two polar opposite ends. But having that empathy, that understanding is the first step to kind of cross that bridge that we were talking about yesterday to really build that solid communication. So thanks, Mark, for sharing that. I'm going to go real quick to Gwendolyn just posted a comment here live. So we'll address that one real quick if you're good with that, Mark.
Yeah,
she asks, how can you get someone to engage when you have expressed a desire to put them in the driver's seat in when you speak, but they're reluctant to still communicate? All right, let's just process that a little bit. Make sure we understand that question. So how can you get someone to engage? You express the desire to put them in the driver's seat in when you speak, but they're still reluctant to communicate. Okay, I think we got it.
I think I get this. I think what Gwendolyn's trying to say is, hey, let's, it sounds like she's trying to make things comfortable for her partner. She's thinking, okay, well, if I put them in charge of this conversation, maybe they'll be able to open up a little bit more. And her concern is, okay, here they are, they're still not willing to share, to open up, to communicate, even though it sounds like she's making some efforts to make it comfortable. Is that how you're reading it?
Yeah, that's how I'm reading it. Gwendolyn, if we aren't understanding your question, you can go ahead and leave another comment, but I think we got it. So you encouraged your husband to take the driver's seat, probably to make him more comfortable. Are we understanding that correctly? But then they're still not communicating in the way that you want, right? So how would we handle that kind of a situation, Mark, where they've kind of set this up in their relationship? She's asked him to be in the driver's seat, but he's not engaging, and she wants to know how to engage.
Yeah.
That's a really good question.
Well, I would look at this from two different angles, So first thing I would check in on is, okay, how, even though Gwendolyn is making some efforts at helping him to feel comfortable sharing, I'm still wondering whether that comfort is there. Because, by and large, I find that people don't communicate, they don't open up because they don't feel comfortable. Now, it might be that you're doing everything that you can to say, hey, this is a great place to share. I'm not going to be judging at all. But, this is, I don't often subscribe to stereotypes, but, stereotypical males are generally a little bit less equipped to share emotionally, just open up and talk about their feelings. So that can be another thing that might keep your husband from opening up if he just simply doesn't have the skills there. So, like I said, first thing I would check is, okay, where's the comfort level in opening up? And since we don't know exactly what is getting in the way, what I would suggest is actually talking about that very issue right there in a very open and understanding and empathic way. So, just going to your husband and saying, look, I'd really like to be able to communicate and open up. What can we do about that? What is getting in the way? Is there anything that you don't feel comfortable with? But if you're approaching this as a team, this is something that you need, and you approach it as a team, and it's okay no matter what he shares, you've created that safe space to actually tackle the problem. Because by and large, just based on your comment, I get the impression that we don't necessarily understand what's getting in the way. So, like I said, I approach it from a couple different angles. So there's one, figuring out, where the comfort level is and addressing that, making things safe, and two, actually addressing that barrier. Like I mentioned before, if you're seeing out some sort of wall, talk about that wall, talk about that barrier. And I think that should at least get the ball rolling. Now, if there's further problems, further reluctance, we'd have to go into more specific details, but I think that should get you pretty far.
Awesome, thanks. All right, let's go to our next one. This is an anonymous one. Goodness. It's amazing Ben ever understands me when I talk like this. Okay. All right. So she wants to know how to get my husband to open up and talk to me. Again, we're talking about the opening up here. A wife wanting the husband to open up. So we kind of addressed that a little bit. But so this one specifically talks about the whole day he'll send me messages like gorgeous wife, sexy babe, etc. Things like I miss you. And he does send little pics with sayings. The problem comes in here, that he had a fake Facebook profile and used to chat to an old flame. The way he opened up with her, it seems he can't do with me. He would tell her how his day is going or how frustrated he's feeling. I do try and ask, how is your day going? And he will reply, okay. We're trying to move forward, but he feels that sex is a way to soothe me and make me feel better. So what can I do? Really good question here.
Yeah. So my main concern here is, it almost seems like there's not an effective way to bring up this concern, this issue effectively. In other words, here we are, we have this big problem. Here, her husband is able to communicate with this other woman, and less willing to open up with her. That's a huge issue, and I can just, based on what is going on, I can see why it would be really difficult to talk about that subject specifically. There's going to be a lot of background tension going on. The inherent in the issues, it's going to be some guilt on the husband's part. Assuming he's feeling guilty, there's going to be some either jealousy or some other negative feelings on the wife's part, and it's all that's going to get in the way of actually tackling this problem. And so, first off, we have to get around that to actually address the issue itself. And so, I do suggest actually discussing those feelings first, discussing the jealousy, discussing the guilt in a very low pressure, very understanding, non-judgmental way. And so you can kind of, you need to peel back the layers on these issues. So, I mean, on the surface level, we have this thing, okay, he's not sharing the day. But when we peel back, okay, here's this jealousy and this guilt. And when we peel it back further, there's like an inability to actually discuss some concerns with each other. And so as we start, addressing the different layers, we can finally get to this surface level problem. Now, beyond that, what I would suggest is, instead of just addressing the problem, we actually want to encourage the kind of behavior that you do enjoy. What I mean by that is anytime that he does open up, anytime that he does share, anytime that he does, make himself vulnerable, express his feelings, or, get into that kind of conversation with you at any level, encourage him and reward him in some way. Now, it sounds like, and sometimes I talk about stereotypes, with a lot of men, that might be being a little bit flirtatious, but in this case, it sounds like that's not as rewarding for her husband. If he's using sex to soothe her, but certainly I'm sure there's things about the relationship that he does enjoy, and so this goes into maybe the languages of love topic. So if you haven't looked up the 5 languages of love, I would suggest that. Figure out what his language of love is and really play to that when he's doing the things that you enjoy. He'll get the picture eventually that, hey, when I open up and when I talk about this with my wife, then she really responds well and it's enjoyable, and it turns into something that he'd actually be seeking out and enjoying more than just, instead of holding back and begrudgingly giving out.
Right. I really like what you talked about with rewarding that good behavior. Here's an example of what not to do. Okay. We saw this before with someone that we worked with. She would send all these text messages to her husband wanting him to check in with her. And it would be like she'd send a message and nothing would happen. She'd call and leave a voicemail and nothing would happen. Several more hours would go by. And by the time he finally called her, she was angry as soon as they got on the phone. Why didn't you call me earlier? I sent you all these messages. And so helping her shift from that and recognizing that she was actually punishing the very behavior that she was wanting, that wasn't getting her where she wanted to go. Right, Mark? So showing her how to reward that by being positive and grateful and appreciative. Oh, I'm so happy you called me. I just so enjoy talking to you, and then again, speaking to his love language as another reinforcement of that positive behavior that you're looking for them. It's going to get you going a lot further. But really, if we step back again, Mark mentioned this at the very beginning, the root issue is that anger, that guilt, right? Any of that. And if you don't clear that out first, immediately you kind of like vomit that on the other person, right? So that's what Mark said. We want to address those emotions and those feelings first, so that then you can start to get to these other things where you can talk about it in a very safe and empathetic way, and then start rewarding the behavior that you want. But you've got to feel it first that you're in a place where you can do that. If you're feeling so much, resentment or jealousy toward this other person and bitterness towards what your husband's doing, and that's what you always bring to the surface first, you got to be able to express that and get that out of the way. So
completely agree.
Really, really good. Awesome. Okay.
So we tackle one more, or?
Yeah, I think we'll tackle one more for today. We'll just go to this one by Jolene. My husband refuses to give what he demands of me. There is a huge amount of double standards and lack of personal responsibility in my marriage. I'm going to go ahead and drop that one here so everyone can see that. But we're talking about this idea of double standards. And that is something that we definitely want to make sure we clear up and communicate in an effective way. So, Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts, just based on the brief statement there, my impression is that her husband probably doesn't completely realize what he's doing. Because I mean, it wouldn't make much sense to put some demands out when he's not willing to do the same things that he's demanding. What I'm saying here is there seems to be some miscommunication, a lack of, just a disconnect here. Mm-hmm. The primary thing that I think would be really helpful is, like some of these other things, is just having an effective way to bring up this concern without it turning into a fight. I imagine that it's probably been brought up several times. It's probably very likely this Jolene has probably told her husband, you can't, or, you keep doing this. You demand these things of me. You're not willing to do it yourself. And my guess is that it's not shared in such a way as to tackle the problem well, or to come together as a team to actually solve the problem. It's just kind of put out there in such a way as to express the problem, maybe show him how angry you are, upset you are, and how guilty he should feel. And I mean, that comes across as an unpleasant situation, and people tend to avoid those kind of conversations. Not always, but I'm guessing because it's not being taken care of, I'm guessing that it's being avoided. And so we really need to have some sort of way to address this issue and actually have it be mutually beneficial. Have it some sort of reason to talk about this, and not have him pull back and withdraw and avoid. So, some things that can be done is, one, making the conversation safe to have. Just starting with that discussion, like we said in some of the other questions, making it safe, having a lot of understanding, having a lot of empathy for your husband, so that it ends up being actually safe to discuss his point of view and discuss what's going on his side. Like I said earlier, he probably doesn't fully realize exactly what he's doing, and he probably looks at it in a slightly different way. So we want to figure that out. In addition to that, this might be just, some of the things that he's doing just might be really ingrained in him, and it might be difficult to kick some of those habits. So being able to work on it as a team and having support from you is really going to be the most effective way to get past some of these behaviors. And so if you want to be on the same team, if you want him actually wanting your support in tackling this problem, it needs to be in some way appealing to him to discuss it and actually do something about it. And so once again, we go back to some of the other things that were said. If you're able to reward him for the things that you do enjoy, that you do want, encourage those things, it's going to make it a lot smoother. And it might sound like we're putting a lot of the emphasis on what you need to do, but without his side of the story, it's kind of hard to say, okay, your husband needs to do this and he needs to do that, and in order to get what you want, sometimes we have to place some emphasis on on in this case Jolene. But certainly there's things that he can do, but this is what Jolene can do in this situation, is make things safe, encourage the behavior that she does enjoy, and figure out a way to work on that issue as a team, giving support for him.
Absolutely. So going back to the analogy I just used yesterday, just to kind of sum it all up, when you're looking at that bridge between you and your spouse, and you're wanting to cross that for some of these really important issues, you guys have brought up some great topics that have covered a lot of different issues that are really common in communication habits. So when you're looking at that bridge, think about, am I shooting an arrow, like a fiery arrow at the bridge that's going to destroy it? Or am I building it with strength, right? And so just take a second, even just a beat, to check in with yourself. Think about the kind of response that you're bringing to this, what kind of energy you're bringing to this, what kind of intention and emotion. And if it's going to be positive and empathetic, understanding, compassionate, loving, kind. Those are all the things that are going to really help you to build that bridge so you can cross it together. And then conversely, if you feel like there's a lot of tense emotion, a lot of anger, bitterness, then those need to be handled in healthy ways and communicated in healthy ways as well. So it doesn't turn into anything destructive that's going to be counterintuitive to what you're actually wanting to accomplish. So Mark, any final thoughts here? And then I'm going to go into our neat little freebie that we have for everyone.
I don't have anything deep or anything. I just really appreciate people putting out the effort to, give us some questions. And, I really, I thought these were really good and applicable for a wider audience, which is why I especially like doing these sort of things, because a lot of these problems, they show up in lots of different situations, but, oftentimes we can boil it down into, and explain it in similar ways so that it's helpful for lots of people. So thanks for putting out some questions for us. I know it's very likely that it's helped some other people, and I guess that's all I have to say.
Yeah, awesome. And again, communication is something that can be learned. It is a skill. It's something that we're not often taught. We're not often taught how to come to someone with empathy or understanding. It's just not very common that happens, but it is something that you can develop just like a muscle, and working on it with diligence and persistence, you can absolutely master it. So we have created a little freebie for you guys. I'm going to show that there. But this is a marriage communication assessment. It's a way that you can go in and see what your strengths and your weaknesses are in your communication. And I promise you there are some strengths, okay? And that's important to identify as well. There are some things that you're doing well on. And so you really want to make sure you keep those strong and allow those to move you forward. And this will help assess where you might need some further help on, uncover some issues that you guys might be having in your communication, and give you some tips on how to move forward. So it's completely free, just a free assessment. You can go on there and go through the little quiz, the checklist, and see where you guys are at. And if you need further help with that, feel free to reach out to Mark and I. But above all, we do appreciate you, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day. So thank you, Mark, and we will see you guys next time.
All right. See you.
Bye.